Well, first off, the most practical thing I would say is just never make blind introductions. Just don't do that. It pisses people off every time. And yeah, there's a time and a place for saying yes to everything. And that's probably what I did in my early 20s when I was just starting out and I had no network and I had more time and freedom to just take calls that might not manifest into anything. And sometimes you still do that because you just have a hunch that it's going to be valuable. But still, like in most cases, most defined, established professionals don't have time to say yes to everything. And that's okay.
Welcome to Success Reimagined. I am Dr. Amna Shabbir, your host on this journey to thrive at the intersection of ambition and wellness. In every episode, I'll help you challenge outdated definitions of success, discover practical tools and strategies for growth without compromising your well-being. I am so glad you've joined me. Let's reimagine what's possible together. Ryan Paugh has been at the forefront of building highly curated, technology-enabled communities for ambitious professionals for his entire career. He first co-founded Brazen Careerist, a career management platform for high-achieving young professionals and college students, which Mashable recognized as one of the top social networks for Gen Y entrepreneurs. In 2010, he co-founded the Young Entrepreneur Council, an invitation-only organization for top entrepreneurs under 45 that Entrepreneur called one of the most elite organizations of its kind. Today, Ryan is co-founder, president, and CEO of Community.co, the company behind well-known professional communities, including Forbes Councils. I also read the impactful book he co-authored, Superconnector, and absolutely loved it. I am so excited to dig into today's conversation. Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So I had so many questions. I know I created sort of an outline to follow. I want everyone to know your journey because you've built these amazing curated communities. And that's a very kind of unique talent to focus on that. So I'm curious to know a bit more about what drew you into community building. What was like the problem that you were trying to solve?
Yeah, well, first off, I tell people there's a lot of easier businesses to do than community businesses. This isn't, get rich quick scheme or anything. It's really, it's a lot of work and all communities are different. And when I started doing it, I don't think I was, trying to solve a need that I knew that I had. It just kind of happened organically. I think I really started figuring out that what I was doing was building community in sort of the vernacular that we now know community building to be. Everyone wants a community, brands, people, et cetera. It's just kind of like part of our business jargon now. But, when I was starting out, I was just a first time entrepreneur. We were launching Brazen. I was dealing with imposter syndrome and just trying to kind of find my place in the business that I just kind of fell into with some amazing partners and friends of mine. And I realized where my sweet spot was in this role of really connecting people, listening and discovering strengths and weaknesses in our network. And Brazen really started out as a social network, as you mentioned earlier, for young professionals like me at the time who were just kind of struggling to find their way. And I kind of took the lead and really, helping bring that community together and helping them have a safe space to really talk about their challenges and also connect with other generations who, were there and willing to listen and wanted to learn about this next generation of young people that they were going to be working with. And it just sort of came to me and one of my other co-founders, Penelope, that, I was building community. I was doing community management and the role of community manager, which is now like a role that people seek out as a profession, was something that was just starting to be talked about at the time. It was sort of the beginning of the social media era and this role of being like that online curator of people and also offline curator of people is just kind of becoming a thing. And I was probably one of the first people to latch onto that. So it wasn't so much that I was solving a need or a challenge per se, but that I was, finding out who I was at the time and kind of trying to take those skills and some of that inherent superpower that was just a part of who I am and applying it to our business and just trying to create value for other people.
That is fascinating. And I heard you say the word like you were listening. And I feel that a lot of times we just walk into whether it is also in finding ourselves in entrepreneurship or we have like this preconceived notion of like, this is what it's going to be. I know what I'm doing or I have this goal. What I
Yeah.
hear you say is a lot of like flexibility and openness and also with community building, that element of actually truly listening to people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty messy. There's no science to it, right? We say it in the Superconnector book at the very beginning, like this isn't a blueprint that I'm going to tell you to follow and you're going to win and leave, the last chapter as a super connector, right? You're going to learn about some skills that we've applied in our lives and learned how to build relationships that give you a competitive advantage. We're going to teach you some skills that other people have applied, hopefully leave you with some inspiration to kind of figure it out for yourself, because there is no one size fits all. Like it really is about showing up and listening and figuring out where you fit in the mix and figuring out how to kind of, be a habitually generous person who shows up and builds relationships because they're focused first on listening to their needs and figuring out ways that you can connect the dots that help you build trust and authenticity that's going to pay dividends down the road when those people become the ones that are going to give back by bringing opportunities to you, because there is that trust and there is that sort of desire to give back when someone has helped you. I genuinely think that most people want to help other people if given opportunities to do so. We just need to find ways to be more honest and authentic with one another, especially now, like as we enter this AI era that we're living in. Like trust is such a difficult concept, right? Creating content's cheap. Building trust and having good judgment is more important than ever for us to just make sure that we keep that human side at the forefront. So yeah, just continuing to kind of show up, listen, and put other people first, I think is the starting point for all of that to happen.
That is really powerful. And as look at the posts that you share, even on LinkedIn, like I'll notice that they don't look AI generated. They look like you just wrote them. Like you just
Well,
typed.
and I do use AI, but I think that and I think most people should, but I think most people just think that they can, you know, plug in an idea and let AI take run it from there. I write my own ideas down and ask for help refining what I say so it, is readable and something that makes an impact and, you know, can help me in my weaker points, because again, like we're busy people, we all have great ideas, anyone can write a post, but like is it going to have that snap that connects with someone else? And I'm not, I do have a journalism degree, but I'm not the greatest writer in the world, and it's nice to have some tools that help us just make our words more readable and make sure that they make an impact. And that requires, like, first and foremost, you like making sure that your words and your ideas have a pulse, and that your voice and your tone doesn't get lost in the shuffle. And that's, I think, where most people just get it wrong, and we end up with what we call AI slop, just kind of making our feeds less valuable and our connections less probable, because there is no human element to what we're saying anymore.
That is so true. And that's exactly what drew me to them because I was actively reflecting on this specific thing, like, are my posts and what I'm sharing, is it connecting with others? Now, I'll go between using and not using, and of course, and it's as only as good as you are and what your goals are, like you've shared. When you are sharing, it's succinct. And I was scanning my feed for posts, just like updating, see what everyone's doing. Like, you go through doing your rounds, what I would say,
Yeah.
rounds on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I was actively scrolling past things that were just like, I could see this was AI slop, this was like a dump, and then
Yeah.
it's like visually overloading me, so I'm just cognitive fatigue, just move on, move on.
Right. And I bet you don't even realize it anymore. It's like riding a bike. Like we're programming ourselves to know like what that slop looks like. And it's not even like, it doesn't even take us more than a blink to know, okay, this is just garbage and I'm going to move on to the next thing. And it's great for people who recognize that there's such an opportunity to be more human, because you can make such a bigger impact right now and stand out more, because you're right, we're mostly just scanning through a bunch of junk. And if you actually take the time to be thoughtful, that extra minute to add a little piece of yourself to something, there's an opportunity there to build great connections that maybe would have been more difficult to see in a world before AI, where we had to try harder, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm trying to be more intentional myself, like, I've done it, I'm just gonna be open. I feel like so I am brevity has never been my friend, and so as I try to write more and share more online and stay under 60 seconds, I am trying to learn and try to be better, and so I was holding myself accountable as I'm, like, trying to write my own book and feeling lost in this creative process, but shifting gears and coming back a little bit,
Sure.
the community building aspect of it. Now, I can see that you're a great listener. In our previous conversation as well, I could just see that just shining through this natural urge that you have, your presence of being more receptive and listening. For our audience members who are curious, like you mentioned, like community building is such a hip thing these days.
Hmm.
The communities that you've created are invitation only, they're highly vetted. What are some of the do's and don'ts or things that, you wish people would know and you've been dying to say this, or things that annoy you or things that give you joy? Now is the opportunity to share.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think I do talk to a lot of people who, have come to this conclusion that they want to build community as part of their business, or like they want to build community as their business, and they get stuck on some of the fundamentals, things like platform, right? Like most good community concepts, you could start tomorrow for free with nothing more than just really great grit and human capital and just, a strong sense of yourself and a willingness to kind of lead by example and show up and exhibit the qualities that you want other people in your community to exhibit. They get caught in this concept that, you need to home grow something and have your own platform. And yeah, maybe down the road, maybe when you have something viable that's producing revenue and, is something that you want to build some enterprise value in, sure. But, start small, just curate people, find the right folks, be thoughtful about who you bring together and just start by creating value for them in whatever form that means. I think anyone who's creating a community, hopefully, is someone who would want to be a part of that community and has something in common with the group you're bringing together. And, just think about what your wants and needs would be and try to, you know, start by providing those things to others and being generous with your time and also being honest about the things that you're struggling with and forgetting about the facade of what we all look like online and how our, Instagram perfect lives look. Like talk about the gritty stuff and bring challenges to the group and be, magically surprised when you get support and insights from others because when you do that, others will feel like they're in a safe position to follow suit and do the same thing. And then all of a sudden you've created this amazing hive mind of people who, as they're going through their own challenges to achieve whatever their collective goals are, like the first thing they're going to think about is, hopping on and posting in that community and asking for advice and insights. And then that's where the magic happens. You create trusted advisors, maybe partners. You know, I've seen in some of our earlier communities, I was just talking to one of our earlier members of YEC, which you mentioned earlier, and some of those guys they're still like best friends. They made their best friends through going through the early stages of entrepreneurship together in, the communities that we created. And, it still makes me giddy when I see a picture in my feed of them all sitting together now, like 15 plus years later at a table, like having beers and enjoying a dinner together because, of that initial connection that we made. So again, just start small, focus on the human side, lead by example. I think that's what's important. Don't try to over architect in your brain this perfect community setup, right? Like that will all come. But just like most businesses, you have to move fast. You have to be willing to like let it just be a little bit messy and be comfortable in that. And there's something just incredibly human about that I think people are drawn to as well. So that's, another advantage of just moving fast and not being afraid of like things being far less than perfect. Your
Where
favorite word, by the way.
Yeah, I was trying to restrain myself. So what is I mean, there were so many great points that you mentioned, and I really wanna highlight one of the words that came to my mind, which was psychological safety. Because there
Yeah.
are so many places, like, we just don't you cannot have a community minus psychological safety.
Yeah, you can, but it's a crappy community to be a part of. It's not gonna be a good one.
That's right. So, A lot of what I heard you say was trust, grit, having the spirit of giving, and not being an overthinker and perfectionist. So now I'm gonna just ask you straight up because I can't wait any longer. Ryan, do you identify with any form of perfectionism or perfectionism spectrum? Or just personal
Yeah,
view.
absolutely. I think any founder will probably tell you that they've got some, aspect of them that is sort of that control freakish tendency that is, driven by this underlying belief that the only way for it to be perfect is for me to do it myself. And, that's kind of like a death sentence in a way because putting everything on yourself is kind of like the antithesis to growth and being able to move beyond just, a world and a business and an objective that is solely focused on you is never going to help you reach your goals. You're going to have to bring in other people and allow them to make mistakes and bring their own flavor of things and get over the perfectionism tendencies because really the only thing that is perfect is a great team with a lot of opposing viewpoints, strengths and weaknesses and things that when they come together are what it's going to create that magic that makes a business and a company something that you want to show up and be a part of and creates real wealth for the people behind it.
That is a fresh perspective, the way that you phrased it in terms of looking at the team, and a perfect team is a team that's a collection of opposing viewpoints. I really like that. So, what has allowed you to kind of move away from that very controlled, rigid narrative that falls under perfectionism to being in this space where you're comfortable delegating,
Yeah.
more
I don't,
open?
I figured it out through trial and error as most people do. I didn't come up with a good formula. I didn't have someone like you to help me unlearn some of my bad habits back when I started. But I think just having good people around me that helped me think outside the box and again, just getting more comfortable with myself and who I am with age, right? I think one thing that I struggle with, and a lot of people do, especially early on, some people for their entire life is just this concept of self awareness, right? And being comfortable with who you are and knowing who you are and slowly finding that sweet spot where you're just I am who I am. And this is me, strengths, weaknesses, all, once you kind of figure out where you fit, I think you become a lot more comfortable with the idea of bringing other people in that help strengthen, your collective purpose, right? I think that's really how I figured it out. And again, it's just the combination of just learning from others and letting others challenge me and just aging up into a level of comfort that I didn't have when I was a 20 something startup founder. It just kind of takes time to figure that stuff out.
When I am talking about perfectionism, and I so appreciate you sharing this specific example because it boils down to two of the principles that I talk about in my Courage Bridge framework. The first is to have the courage to examine your intentions, which requires a lot of self awareness. And so you pointed out to that. And the last part is having the courage to model your humanity. So when you surround yourself with other humans that are, modeling it's okay to fail, that are just modeling being human around you, that really does challenge those perfectionistic tendencies we learn through vicarious experiences. So I found that very insightful when you shared that.
Good, good. I'm glad that landed well.
You mentioned a little bit about being a young founder. And so I'm curious to learn a little bit about your relationship with failure.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think I talked a little bit earlier about that imposter syndrome, right? I showed up in my first company not knowing what to expect, but willing to take the leap with some friends that, again, had strengths where I had weakness and vice versa. And man, was that just waking up for days on end feeling like a complete failure, right? Seeing no progress, seeing nothing kind of get realized in the actual day to day of making, our goals and our vision like an actual business, right? Something that makes money, something that produces. That was kind of a scary time. And I think where I first learned that, you know, showing up and not seeing any progress is going to be a lot of the days that you spend building a business until one day it clicks. And even then you move on to your next goal. And I think that's going to be a lot of days where you show up just doing the just the little things that seem boring at the time, but really accrue into that next magic moment and that next success. And then sometimes, you know, you show up, you do something well, and you eventually look in the mirror and realize it didn't work and you got to stop. I think we've had as many community failures as we've had successes. And, in our business, it's just become a part of the business life cycle. We know certain things are going to fail, just like other companies know certain things are going to fail. And they've kind of like, they've worked that into their thinking when they model out like how they're going to make money and what their budget's going to look like. Like smart businesses factor in failure every day. So why do we as individuals make failure such a like just death sentence moments for our egos? Like it's literally factored in to like some of the most successful companies in the world. And for some reason a lot of us are still kind of like stuck on this concept that if we fail, that's it. But really it's just kind of like another inflection point for change and an opportunity to grow and take another direction until you finally find that click.
That was really powerful. I want everyone to go back and listen to what Ryan just said. So thank you for allowing us all to examine our, relationship with failure. Because as you mentioned, I never looked at it in this sense that it's factored into business models. And yet in our life, when we're going back to that perfectionism part of it, because, when everything has to go through this really strict lens of appearing a certain way, impression management being so critical, you don't want to show the mess, and somewhere along the line you also have internalized that narrative that I'm not allowed to fail, which means I'm not allowed to be human.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm
Cool.
gonna
I'm glad you like that.
Yeah, this is great. So, I'm gonna just shift gear again, and I had this question come up in my mind as I was waiting for, our conversation was coming up, and I had a string of poor introductions, is that what I would say. It drives me crazy when someone introduces 2 people, "You're great, they're great, please take it from here." And
Yeah.
so I'll give a special shout out to Allie Potts, our great human friend who is awesome,
One of the
certified great
best
human.
humans.
She did such a great job of introducing us both, like, in this really meaningful way,
Yeah.
and we're here,
Yeah.
uh, this turned out great, and even the other individuals that have introduced me to other people and, the way this goes, it all came from, like, a good place, right? That's why they're taking that time to send the email, connect to people. But when it is so vague, I just don't know what to do with that. And part of my whole thing moving forward is being really clear where I'm spending my time and my energy, because there was a time when I was saying yes to everything. I took the same energy of saying yes in medicine to then entrepreneurship, which is like blanket yes to everything. You do what that's not how life works. We have finite amount of time. What do you wish, after hearing me go on about that, what would be a solution to this problem, Ryan?
Yeah. Well, first off, the most practical thing I would say is just never make blind introductions. Just don't do that. Right? It pisses people off every time. And yeah, there's a time and a place for saying yes for to everything. And that's probably what I did in my early 20s when I was just starting out and I had no network and I had more time and freedom to just, you know, take calls that might not, manifest into anything. And sometimes you still do that because you just have a hunch that it's going to be valuable. But still, like in most cases, most like defined, like established professionals don't have time to say yes to everything, and that's okay. A lot of people worry that like if you want to be a good networker, or a good community builder, a good connector, you should always say yes. You should always be ready to help someone, even if you know there's really nothing in it for you. And to some extent, that generosity is super important to kind of like weave into the fabric of what you do every day. But also like recognizing that we can't say yes to everything and being more just like focused and deliberate about our time, it matters a lot, right? We both have teams and businesses and families and other relationships outside of our businesses that matter, that need our attention. And there are only so many hours in the day before, that your head hits the pillow and it's all done. And I feel it's very important to understand that just because you think there's a magic moment by connecting two people and trying to make that collision happen doesn't mean that it's going to happen. It also doesn't mean that like someone's ready for that or that it's the right time. And putting people in the position to have to say no after you've kind of like made that introduction already, it doesn't feel good. It feels a little icky. So just avoid it and just be thoughtful about asking first. You know, Allie was so great. Going back to how she introduced us, I think I could probably pull up a Slack conversation we have in our community code channels where she, um, had written probably like 3 or 4 paragraphs about you. And I was like, well, first off, like, how valuable I think of my time during the day, and it's mostly given to my team. You must really dig this person if you want me to meet her. And I said yes, and that was great. And I'm sure she did on your side, sort of the same kind of thing, right? To make sure that like we understood who each other were and where there's value and where we might, be able to help one another. And I imagine like if I would have said no, I don't have the time, you would have been like, ah, that's cool, and you would have moved on. Or if you had said that to me, I'd be like, yeah, it's cool. On to the next thing. But at least we didn't forge that like uncomfortable, like blind introduction that leaves people feeling, a little bit, forced right into something. I don't like that. I don't. I still get really frustrated when people do that, and actually lose a little bit of respect and trust and the people that do that sort of thing, because it is kind of like it's like a boundary that's being crossed. Like I really think it's so important for us to be you know very cognizant of our time and how we give back, so we can give back in the most meaningful ways and avoid things where we don't feel like the value is going to be really received in a way that's worth the time that could have been spent somewhere else. So again, like it's just the most practical thing. Like just don't do blind introductions. That's it. And if you don't do that and you're more thoughtful about asking before you make a connection, like you're not going to run into that problem. That's like really like the worst part about that is what makes a bad introduction, like for me, any day of the week.
I just feel so validated in what you just said. Yeah.
Everyone's thinking it, right? I mean, and if you're not, like, I mean, it is a little bit naive, like, like to just take any call. Again, young professional, all the time in the world. Sure, maybe take every meeting you can just to get some experience and to meet some people and to just see what happens. But then, like, gain that self-awareness really quick about like where you feel your time's most valuable, and like you've earned the right to say no and to set some boundaries. And again, some people just don't really, they kind of like go into this connector mode with a blindfold on and think they're doing the right thing, but really they're kind of setting themselves up to look a little pretty crappy, to be honest, when you do that sort of thing, and also putting two people that you're trying to build trust with in a really awkward place.
Yeah. And earlier you said that it feels like a boundary has been crossed,
Yeah.
and that's exactly how it feels at this point. I feel I was examining my own frustrations. This is years ago with I was sitting with my own coach, and what came to my awareness at that point, pointed and amplified by the help of my own coach, was that I resent when people basically take away the one resource that I can never replenish, which is my time.
Yeah. Good
I
for
can't
you.
get that back.
Absolutely. Yeah. Resent away. You absolutely should. And I don't, there's nothing wrong with that. That's like how you should feel.
I appreciate the permission. So I'm going to hold on to that and just be even myself, even more thoughtful when I am introducing others. And for our audience members, I would encourage you to read Superconnector. I found a lot of great advice and stories and tips just in the book. And I know you just had the eighth
Thank you.
anniversary of the book.
Yeah. Yeah. I just noticed that the other day. I was, wow, like time really flies. Almost 10 years. I'll have to like, do a 10-year anniversary party or something.
Yeah, you should. Like writing a book is no small.
It's no joke. It's a lot of work.
And writing a book that actually matters. So it really, like, 8 years down the road, I still found it extremely relevant and
Thank
pertinent
you.
and also inspiring is what I would say, because like you mentioned, there is this, you can be a giver or you can be a taker, or you can just look at everything as a transaction, and then you will have, like, what I would say a miserable life, but
Yeah.
coming from a space of being a giver, and there were actually, like, a lot of practical strategies for community building in the books. I found like, a really good read.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad it still applies. I think the world's changed, but the principles definitely stay the same.
Absolutely, and the ones that are grounded in humanity continue to stay the same.
Yeah. Let's hope that that's always the case, right?
Yes. Speaking of humanity and community building, I want to ask your thoughts on the Dunbar number, and I'm going to expand that a little bit for our
Okay.
audience. So, anthropologist Robin Dunbar proposed that humans can maintain about 150 stable social relationships with smaller inner circles of 5 and 15 meaningful ties. Now, you've been building communities that connect thousands. How do you design large scale communities while still protecting that depth and the meaningful connection within these cognitive limits?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, I'll tell you one thing, like back in like the YEC or the Brazen days, I was far more intimately connected with people than I am now, right? I've had to pull myself back and be kind of like the architect, right? Because you're right, you just can't maintain that quantity of relationships and have it be significant. It sort of requires you to think about how to, create community in a way that becomes, again, bigger than any one person, including yourself. But just, for the average person, I think that is kind of another important boundary for you to set for yourself, an understanding of like, you know, the types of relationships you're going to have and the depth of those relationships. You're probably always going to have that like, average of five like inner circle people that are just kind of like your people, like the most deepest of levels. And then kind of circles outside of that nucleus that kind of, are relationships that are also important, but have like their own sets of boundaries and just like shared value and understandings behind them that, allow you to continue to like give to one another and support one another, but also like aren't necessarily going to have that depth and, maybe more time goes by in between like those connection points and, that's okay. And of course, like in your immediate five, right? That's probably not going to be like something you just let sit for 6 months and then pick up the phone and everything is just the same. Like there's just different layers to the like relationships you're going to build in your life. And I think, the equation, the Dunbar equation is, you know, certainly not a blueprint, right? Like everyone has to kind of like set their own boundaries and figure out what works for them. But I think that's a very strong kind of like jumping off point to reverse engineer how you're going to build relationships in your life that work for you and work for the people around you without overcommitting and kind of oversaturating and then just doing a terrible job of like, maintaining relationships in general with everyone around you because you're just kind of like, you're like spinning plates and, trying to balance things on your head. It's not going to work. So you gotta find those limits and, create some structure for yourself, just like other areas in your life that need that like self-awareness and the moderation that you figure out that comes from it.
There is that huge piece that's missing when we talk about community building, which you just pointed out, I feel, as from an outsider who's not an expert on community building, which is validating the fact that you have a limit and defining it. So whether it's that like specific number, whether it is going from the 5 to the 150, but actually just using this as a moment to recognize what your boundaries are, absolutely, like you've said, and actually defining it and being okay with the fact that you cannot be like, I feel with online spaces being now pulled in, we have this illusion that we can be actually like hyper connected with thousands of people. And I feel that nervous system wise, that is just such a load. And then of course, like how can you be that way for everyone? So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important for us to kind of, remind ourselves that we're human, right?
Yes, always.
We're not machines. We're not designed to, spend all our time trying to like fit into a box for every single person around us on every single platform. Like, you have to figure out what works well for you, where you can give the best part of yourself to others, and then kind of again engineer a system that works to build quality relationships that are generous and valuable to other people and good for yourself. And it's not always a quantity thing. It's more of a quality setup that first and foremost requires you to kind of figure out what quality means for you and where you can really give the best piece of yourself.
Absolutely. And you can use that strategically and be able to help yourself professionally as well as personally. I feel like this is really kind of leaning into your well-being blueprint, if you must say,
Yeah.
like who are the people that absolutely you're surrounding? What are the strategic communities and spaces that you are investing in and investing doing so understanding your human limits?
Yeah, absolutely. And we should look at it that way. Like this isn't like a business thing, right? Today, like business and life are just so intertwined anyway. Like just, looking at our relationships as a whole, both business and personal, as well as that kind of like weird gray area in between, like that's part of it too. It's not two separate things that you want to analyze separately necessarily. It's kind of like looking at the whole picture of like the people in your life and how that's going to be set up for success or failure.
Yes. Now, talking about success and failure, I was thinking about when we're talking about communities and visibility, a lot of leadership when it comes to community building requires visibility. What advice would you give ambitious professionals who want to build a meaningful community but don't naturally love public speaking or being in the spotlight?
Yeah, first off, like, so I hate public speaking. I've turned down more conferences and speaking engagements than like I care to count when people are like, "What is wrong with you, Ryan?" Like they want you to come on stage. They want to pay you to do it too. And I'm like, it just doesn't that's not my thing. Like I don't love it. I'll do it on occasion, but really like the mental load and the anxiety that builds up prior to something like that is just not worth it to me. And I find that I'm such a better human and give back in ways that make me feel good as well when I'm dealing with smaller groups. And that's kind of what I focus on is how can I give back in smaller groups. For some people, that big public speaking platform is the right thing. For someone like me who's probably just more introverted and veers away from that, like the energy that you have to provide in order to just put yourself in that position, it just ends up putting yourself in a position where the juice isn't worth the squeeze. So again, like it comes back to just self-awareness and understanding yourself but also just understanding like, again, there's no one size fits all. You don't have to do anything. Find what works well for you and just lean into that. For me, visibility means making time to share my ideas and create a personal brand online that showcases vulnerability, my learnings, my failures, and hopefully feels human and impactful to others in a way that like builds some trust. And especially, I think right now, as we talked about earlier, in this new AI era that we're living in, like there is a distinct advantage in focusing back on personal brand in a way that feels human because so many people are doing such a really sucky job at building their brand with AI that, if you even just give like, a little bit of a humanity, a little bit of a dose of like your real self, you can stand out as a more trusted executive or leader behind a brand than your competitor without a lot of work. Because again, like people are they're downsizing and cutting back on like the creativity and the humanity that takes, maybe like a fraction more time to produce just to save a buck and to do it more streamlined. But in the long run, you're losing out on so much opportunity to build visibility that actually matters. So again, like just remember, there's a lot of ways to create visibility and trust and authority. It doesn't require you to, get up on a big stage in front of 300 people. But if you show up online and in social media and even in closed platforms and closed communities right now, which, is kind of like what we specialize in, and really just give your best self and show up ready to help others, you can create a lot of meaningful visibility that turns into great relationships and even some business opportunity. So, like find your space and show up as yourself, not as a bot, and do the work and just, make sure that what you're doing feels, in line with who you are, and don't try to fit a square peg into a round hole because, it feels like the right thing to do or someone else tells you it's the right thing to do.
Thank you, first of all, for openly sharing your relationship with public speaking because one couldn't have guessed it otherwise, right? And so I think it humanizes you and the fact that even further for our audience members, knowing the success that you've created and knowing that that's just not your thing, but you found what I wrote down when you were speaking was visibility that matters. Like, how do you create that in a meaningful way that is aligned with who you are? So I appreciate that advice very much.
Well, you're welcome.
Brian, I'm going to invite you to step away and look at your journey so far as an entrepreneur and as a leader, as a community builder, and just in life. How have you redefined success for yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. I maybe need some caffeine. Okay. Yeah, I think okay, so, I started in my 20s. I think I was probably 23, maybe younger when we first started Brazen, probably 28 when we launched YEC, Scott and I, early 30s when we kind of transformed that into community doc. And I think, when I started in my 20s, I thought this was all gonna lead to some, unicorn style exit for me and, just, retiring on the beach somewhere. What I learned about myself along the way is, you know, a paycheck is nice, that comfort is nice, and we have created a business that has given me and my family some comfort that's very important that I wanna sustain. But the real joy is come from the fact that I get to show up and work on something that I love doing every day, and even if the right, you know, event and or something came along for us, I would have to think twice about whether or not that's something I want because what we have is so special and special because I get to work with amazing people and help executives build relationships and hit goals that really not only helps them, but fills my cup. But also because I've created like a balance for myself where I get to, you know, also wake up and, not get on the subway and go to a job anymore, but to, have that extra cup of coffee and like sit and talk to my kids and then drive them to school and then come back and, start work when I want to and end a little bit early so I can pick them up and, play outside and do the fun stuff that, maybe like other dads and other moms don't get to do because they get home and maybe they see their kid for a half hour and then it's bedtime. Success for me is just being able to create, you know, a good job, a good life that creates more balance. And the money's great. You know, I I'm not naive. Money does create freedom and opportunity. And people who say otherwise, cheating themselves and others by saying it. But there is more, and there is success, and there is achievement in just, finding great balance and a great job that just creates comfort, which is, I think, what we all want anyway, right? When we break down all of the, like, the nuance of who we are and what we believe, like, we all want that comfort for us and our loved ones, and, like, being able to find that and sustain that, to me, is more important than, like, the huge payout, right? I'm happy with what we've built, and I'd be happy doing this for decades if it continued to provide me the freedom that I have right now to not miss some of those moments that people look back on and regret. So that to me is where success lies now. And it's not what I thought it was going to feel like or look like in my 20s, but now that I'm, in my early 40s, it's like that's the dream. That's the real dream. That's my real goal. And I think that's where real happiness actually exists for people. And that's, what success should be, finding that happiness.
I was that mom who would barely see the kids for bedtime and had many days when I was deep in medical training where I just like when I left, my daughter was asleep. When I came back home, she was still asleep. So as you shared that beautiful reflection on your redefining success, I was reminded of those many moments in my journey where I missed out, and then the very intentional pivot to creating the work that I'm doing right now. And you're right, the access of what that allows me to have with my family, with my life, and with creativity and purpose and passion on a whole different level. So it was really beautifully shared.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm
All right.
glad you don't have to do that anymore.
Yes, I am very glad as well. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I feel like I could sit here and chat with you all day and soak in the calm energy that you're exuding. For our audience members who are listening, I would invite you to go watch the video. Ryan is really calm, zen. That was my first impression as well when we met the first time. Thank you so much for the time that you've spent with us today. How can our audience learn more about your incredible work? I'll put all the links in the show notes, share where they can find you.
Yeah, I'm easy to find, like, online. Like I said before, I I make myself visible because that's, something that's important to me. You'll find me pretty quick. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn these days. I like to share and kind of put myself out there. I think if you want to see what we do with community.co, go to community.co and read about our work. We build professional organizations for media brands, for enterprises, for professional associations that have been around for decades, but now just need kind of like a tech enabled solution and a team that can help them build strategy to take their community work to that next level. My book, superconnectorbook.com, that I co-authored with my business partner, Scott Gerber, is out there for purchase. And yeah, just, don't be a stranger. If you like to reach out, just send me a DM. I'm usually trying to make time to respond to everyone and just at least say hi. And, I appreciate the time to be here. I really enjoyed it too. We could talk for hours and, maybe we'll do it again.
I would love to have you on the podcast again, Ryan. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks.
You might believe you don't have the time or energy to focus on yourself, but this is exactly the right time to get serious about your well-being. You don't have to do it all alone. I'm here to help. If you enjoyed this video and are ready to take the next step, head over to dramnashabir.com where you'll find free resources you can access right away. The website link is below. Let's get started on your path to thriving.